When you think of 90s rock, your mind probably jumps straight to Seattle, to flannel, and to the titans that completely dominated MTV and the radio. You know the names Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains. They were the generals of a musical army that basically conquered the world. Their anthems of angst and alienation became the soundtrack for an entire generation, and their stories are permanently etched into rock and roll history. But for every mega hit that echoed from a high schooler's bedroom, for every band that landed on the cover of Rolling Stone, there were dozens of other groundbreaking groups pushing the boundaries of rock, grunge, and metal in the shadows. These were the bands that were often heavier, sometimes darker, and occasionally way more innovative than their more famous counterparts. They built sounds that history almost forgot, but whose influence you can still hear all over the place today. You know Nirvana and Pearl Jam. Of course you do. But today, we're going deeper to uncover 10 bands that absolutely deserve a second listen. Stick around and let's rediscover some hidden gems of the 90s. Number 10, Grant Lee Buffalo. Coming in at number 10 is a band that critics adored, but radio somehow just missed. Grant Lee Buffalo. They weren't from the rain-soaked Pacific Northwest, but from the sun-scorched streets of Los Angeles. This trio had a totally different take on alternative rock, mixing it with Americana, folk, and a kind of storytelling that felt wise beyond its years. Led by the incredible vocals of Grant Lee Phillips, the band created a sound that was both epic and intimate. Phillips had this voice that could go from a haunting falsetto to a world-weary baritone in a single verse, and his lyrics painted these vivid, cinematic pictures of American life. Michael Stipe of REM was such a huge fan, he reportedly called their 1993 debut album Fuzzy, the best album of the year. High praise, right? Their 1994 album Mighty Joe Moon gave us the song Mockingbirds, a track that perfectly captures their magic. It's a beautiful, sad, blues-infused song that feels like a lost classic from an era that never even existed. Despite all the critical acclaim and the respect from their peers, Grant Lee Buffalo never really broke through to the mainstream. Maybe their sound was too nuanced, too literary, for a scene that was leaning more and more into raw, primal screams. But for those who were paying attention, they were a beacon of originality, proving there was more to 90s rock than just distortion pedals and disillusionment. Number 9, Blind Melon. At number 9, we've got a band that everybody knows, but almost no one really knows, Blind Melon. Say their name and one thing immediately comes to mind: the B-Girl from the No Rain video. That song and video were so huge, so inescapable in 1993, that they almost turned the band into a one-hit wonder, just a quirky footnote in 90s pop culture. But man, Blind Melon was so much more than that. Formed in LA in 1990, the band had this neo-psychedelic vibe that borrowed a lot from 70s rock and jam bands, which really set them apart from the metallic crunch of their grunge friends. At the center of it all was frontman Shannon Hoon, a magnetic, wildly charismatic, and deeply troubled soul from Lafayette, Indiana. Hoon's voice was a ridiculously powerful instrument, and his friendship with fellow Indiana native Axl Rose even got him a guest spot on Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion albums, before Blind Melon even released their debut. Their self-titled first album is a fantastic journey, full of rich textures and soulful rock. But it was their second album, 1995's Soup, that showed their true depth. It was a darker, more complex, and frankly, a better record. But it was largely overshadowed by the tragedy of Hoon's life. His struggles with addiction were well known and ended with his death from an overdose on the band's tour bus in October 1995. He was just 28 years old. It was a devastating end to a story that felt like it had just begun, leaving all of us to wonder what other masterpieces Blind Melon could have created. Number 8, Built to Spill. Coming in at number 8 is a band that basically connected the dots between the worlds of grunge and indie rock, Built to Spill. Formed in Boise, Idaho in 1992, the band was the brainchild of Doug March, a singer and guitarist with a totally unique vision. While their sound had the fuzzy guitars and the quiet, loud dynamics of the grunge era, their whole approach was different. They wrote these intricate, sprawling songs with complex structures and dazzling melodic guitar solos that felt more like Neil Young than Kurt Cobain. March's original idea was for the band to have a different lineup for every album, but he eventually settled into a more stable trio for their most famous 90s stuff. Their 1994 album, There's Nothing Wrong with Love, is an absolute indie rock masterpiece, packed with quirky, heartfelt songs about being a kid and feeling insecure. But it was their major label debut in 1997, Perfect From Now On, that really cemented their legacy. That album was breathtakingly ambitious, with songs that regularly stretched past the 6-minute mark, filled with layered guitar odysseys that were both beautiful and intense. While bands like Pavement were all about that lo-fi slacker vibe, Built to Spill were unabashedly awesome musicians. They weren't afraid to jam, to explore, and to push their songs into totally unexpected places. Their influence is massive. They paved the way for countless indie rock bands in the 2000s, from Modest Mouse to Death Cab for Cutie, who all looked up to their mix of emotional songwriting and guitar heroics. They're still a beloved and influential band today, which is a testament to the enduring power of March's singular vision. Number 7, Alice Donut. All right, for our next one, things are about to get really weird. Coming in at number 7 is Alice Donut, a band so eccentric and unconventional that they make most other alternative bands of the 90s look pretty normal. Formed in New York City in 1986, they were staples of Jello Biafra's legendary alternative Tentacles record label, a perfect home for their bizarre brand of psychedelic punk rock. Seriously, trying to categorize Alice Donut is a fool's errand. Their music was this chaotic and brilliant mashup of hard rock, post-punk, noise, and even brass instruments. And out front was the unforgettable vocal style of Thomas Antona, whose voice could leap from a monstrous growl to a high-pitched warbling squeal, sometimes in the same sentence. It was a love it or hate it thing for a lot of people. But if you were on board, it was completely captivating. Their lyrics were just as strange and in your face, talking about depravity, domestic violence, and the absurdities of life with a darkly humorous and surrealist twist. These were classically trained musicians who chose to use their talents to create something purposefully abrasive and wonderfully strange. They toured relentlessly, building a fiercely loyal cult following who loved that they absolutely refused to compromise. They were never going to get played on the radio, but Alice Donut represented the true, untamed spirit of the underground, a reminder that the most interesting art often happens far away from the spotlight. Number 6, Demolition Hammer. Now it's time to get heavy. Really heavy. At number 6, we have the Bronx's own Demolition Hammer, one of the most ferocious and criminally overlooked thrash metal bands of the early 90s. While thrash metal's golden age was really the late 80s, Demolition Hammer showed up just in time to deliver a couple of masterpieces before the musical tides turned. Their 1990 debut, Tortured Existence, and its 1992 follow-up, Epidemic of Violence, are absolute monuments of brutal, riff-heavy thrash with a death metal edge. Their sound was all about lightning-fast riffs, chunky breakdowns, dual guitar solos, and a raw, aggressive energy that was just relentless. They were considered pioneers of death thrash, a more extreme subgenre that blended the speed of thrash with the brutality of death metal. So why aren't they mentioned in the same breath as Anthrax or Overkill? A lot of it was just bad timing. By 1994, the groove metal of Pantera and the rise of grunge had made their intricate, high-speed thrash seem out of fashion. The band tried to adapt, releasing a slower, groove-oriented album called Time Bomb in 1994. But the change in style turned off some old fans, and the band started to fracture internally. They broke up a year later. For a long time, their albums were out of print, making them a true cult classic for those in the know. They've since reunited for live shows, but Demolition Hammer remains one of thrash metal's best-kept secrets, a brutal testament to a time when metal was pushing its own boundaries. If you're enjoying this trip through rock history, Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. Number 5, Ween. Our number 5 pick is a band that completely defies labels, a duo of musical shapeshifters who could play any genre they wanted, and play it brilliantly. This is Ween. Formed in 1984 by Aaron Freeman and Mickey Melchiondo, better known as Gene and Dean Ween, this band from New Hope, Pennsylvania, was the very definition of alternative. Now, they weren't strictly a metal or grunge band, but Ween's fearless approach meant they dabbled in everything, including heavy metal, punk, and psychedelic rock, right alongside country, funk, pop, and soul. Their real power was their uncanny ability to perfectly copy the sound of any genre, while injecting their own bizarre, often juvenile, and surprisingly profound sense of humor. They got compared to Frank Zappa a lot, though they often said their inspirations were way more diverse. Their 90s output is legendary among their cult following. Albums like 1994's Chocolate and Cheese and 1997's The Mollusk are masterclasses in eclectic songwriting. One minute you're listening to a pitch-perfect Philly soul parody, and the next you're getting hit with a sludgy, heavy guitar riff or a sea shanty. Their music is unpredictable, satirical, and just so creative. This refusal to be put in a box is exactly why they never had massive mainstream success. But it's also what makes them so great. They built one of the most dedicated cult followings in music by promising their fans only one thing: that they would always be completely and utterly themselves. Number 4, Cuse. At number 4, we're heading to the deserts of Southern California to meet the undisputed pioneers of stoner rock, Cuse. Formed in Palm Desert way back in 1987, Cuse created a sound that was as vast and heavy as the landscape around them. They basically took the heavy, bluesy riffs of Black Sabbath, ran them through psychedelic filters, and tuned everything down, way down. Guitarist Josh Homme was the mastermind behind this sound. He famously played his guitar through bass amps to create a thick, fuzzy, and monumentally heavy tone that would go on to define an entire genre. The band perfected their craft playing generator parties out in the desert. These were impromptu shows powered by gasoline generators for small crowds. This unique setting let them develop their live sound without the rules of a traditional venue. Their 1992 album, Blues for the Red Sun, is a landmark record, widely seen as one of the founding documents of stoner rock. And yet, despite the critical acclaim, commercial success just never came. Their album sales were slow, and they were always more of a cult band, a name whispered among musicians and dedicated metal fans. The band broke up in 1995, but their legacy was just getting started. Its members went on to form a bunch of other incredible bands, most famously Josh Homme's Queens of the Stone Age, which would take a more refined version of that desert rock sound to massive international success. Cuse may not have sold millions of records, but they built a sonic world that countless bands are still living in today. Number 3, Screaming Trees. Coming in at number 3 is a band that was right there at the start of the grunge scene, but somehow got lost in the shadows of their more famous peers. Screaming Trees, hailing from Ellensburg, Washington, a small town just over 100 miles from Seattle. The band formed way back in 1984. They were true pioneers of the sound that would eventually be called grunge, blending 60s psychedelia, punk, and hard rock into a powerful swirling mix. At the heart of their sound was the one-of-a-kind voice of Mark Lanegan. His deep, gravelly baritone was one of the most distinctive instruments of the entire era, able to convey both a deep world weariness and a raw power. The band, which also featured the Connor brothers, Gary Lee on guitar and Van on bass, was known for being pretty volatile behind the scenes, which might be one reason their career path was so inconsistent. They had their one big moment in the spotlight in 1992 when their song Nearly Lost You was on the soundtrack to the movie Singles. It became a moderate hit on MTV and radio, and the album it came from, Sweet Oblivion, is a grunge classic. But they never managed to build on that momentum to reach the same heights as Nirvana or Pearl Jam. Their final album, 1996's Dust, was a mature, critically acclaimed record. But by then, the grunge wave was already pulling back. The band quietly broke up in 2000, and Mark Lanegan went on to have a prolific and celebrated solo career. Screaming Trees remained the ultimate what-if band of the grunge scene. They had all the talent, all the right sounds, but were just one step away from superstardom. Number 2, Mother Love Bone. At number 2 is the band that could have, and absolutely should have, been the biggest band in the world. This is the great, tragic what-if story of the entire Seattle scene, Mother Love Bone. Formed in 1987 from the ashes of Green River, a band that also gave us future members of Pearl Jam, Mother Love Bone featured guitarist Stone Gossard and bass player Jeff Ament. But their undeniable star was frontman Andrew Wood. Wood was everything a rock star was supposed to be: flamboyant, charismatic, and a phenomenal songwriter. He brought a glam rock swagger, influenced by artists like T-Rex and Elton John, to Seattle's burgeoning heavy rock scene. While other bands were being introspective and angsty, Mother Love Bone was celebratory and anthemic. They quickly became the hottest band in the city, and a massive bidding war between major labels kicked off. They signed with Polygram and, in 1989, recorded their debut album, Apple. It was scheduled for a March 1990 release, and the band was perfectly positioned for a global breakthrough. But just days before the album was supposed to come out, Andrew Wood, who had struggled with drug addiction for a long time, died of a heroin overdose. He was only 24. His death sent a shockwave through the Seattle community and brought the band to an immediate, heartbreaking end. The album was released after his death, a stunning document of a future that was stolen. Of course, out of that tragedy, Gossard and Ament would go on to form a new band, Pearl Jam, who would become one of the biggest rock bands in history. But for many who were there, Mother Love Bone was the original promise, and Andrew Wood was the scene's first and most devastating loss. Number 1, Melvins. And finally, at number 1, we have the Godfathers, the Originators, the band that influenced nearly everyone else on this list and countless others, yet has remained proudly, stubbornly underground for over 4 decades, the Melvins. Formed in Montesano, Washington in 1983, the Melvins, led by the perpetually inventive Buzz Osborne, or King Buzzo, are less a band and more of a musical institution. Their slow, sludgy, and punishingly heavy sound was a direct precursor to what would become grunge. Kurt Cobain was a huge fan, a roadie, and a friend. He even produced parts of their 1993 major label debut, Houdini. You can't deny the Melvins' influence on Nirvana's sound, but their reach goes so much further, touching on sludge metal, noise rock, and all kinds of experimental music. They chose a name they thought was ridiculous and didn't sound like a typical heavy metal band, which gave them the freedom to do whatever the hell they wanted. Unlike so many of their peers, the Melvins never seemed to even try for mainstream success. They signed to a major label, Atlantic Records, in the 90s, but just kept making bizarre, challenging music that was completely on their own terms. They've been incredibly prolific, releasing dozens of albums and never stopping their relentless touring and experimenting. They are the ultimate musician's band, respected by everyone in the know for their uncompromising integrity and constant innovation. They didn't just ride a wave, they helped create it, and then they watched it pass, content to keep making their own strange and wonderful noise over in the corner. For their foundational influence and their unwavering commitment to their art, the Melvins are, without a doubt, the most important and perpetually underrated band of the era. So, there you have it. 10 bands from the 90s that deserve a spot on your playlist. But this is just our list. The 90s were a deep, deep well of incredible music, and we know we've missed some. That's the real story of the 90s, isn't it? For every band that made it big, dozens of others were out there fighting for their own place in the noise, leaving behind incredible music that's just waiting to be rediscovered. These weren't just footnotes. They were pioneers, innovators, and tragic heroes who shaped the sound of a decade in ways both big and small. Now it's your turn. What bands did we miss? What are your favorite underrated grunge and metal tracks from the 90s? Let us know down in the comments. Thanks for watching.